Welcome to the Better Woman Project podcast. This podcast is dedicated to self-improvement for women and, of course, embracing womanhood in the modern world. My name is Naima, and I'm with my co-host,
Salia Lopez.
Do you want to share a little more than that?
I mean, this is a podcast to embrace your womanhood. And we are here today with Darlene Wrights, family law lawyer and mediator.
Yes, so she is a family lawyer and mediator, and we're going to be talking about all things relationships, especially the later part of the relationship, the breakdowns of the relationship, separation.
My clients call that the best part of the relationship.
So don't get married. Got it.
Whoa. Speaking of marriage, I'm going to say a stat that I often hear in the social media realm when people are coding. This is about divorces. So they always say, don't get married, like Salia just said, which because 50% of divorces, 50% of marriages end in divorce. How correct is that?
I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, I've seen that stat across the board, and depending on your profession, the stat might actually be higher. So among lawyers, it's even higher.
Interesting.
Oh
wow.
And I imagine, depending on the stress level of your job, it just obviously impacts the relationship, and so it doesn't seem to be a deterrent for people. People are still getting married, but yeah, definitely a factor.
Wow, 50%. That's a pretty big number. Wow.
I don't know if that's the exact number, but typically, I'm sure you guys both have heard, like on dating shows, relationship shows, they always pull out this stat of like 60% or 50%. Those are usually the general numbers. Okay, so with that, so before people do get into relationships, I know that there are a lot more people in our generation who are not getting married anymore. So what do you recommend? So considering the stat, do you recommend any precaution or any steps people take before they take that step?
Yes. Yeah. And yes, again. So what I find is a lot of people are getting married older, and so they're coming into the marriage with more. So, most of the older couples or individuals that I represent, when I ask them what assets they had on the date of marriage, it's, big fat zero, right? They got married with absolutely nothing. But now we're having a lot of young professionals getting married in their late 20s, in their 30s, and they have a condo, they have savings, they have investments. So the property laws are different, whether you're legally married or whether you're common law. So, if you do plan to get married, you want to make sure that those assets are protected. And so you can do that with a marriage contract or a cohabitation agreement.
Is that similar to like a prenup?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay,
it's referred to a prenup in the United States.
Yeah.
And in Canada, we refer to it as a marriage contract if, the intention is to get married, or with cohabitating couples, cohabitation agreement.
Yeah, but I feel like there's a lot of stigma with like if you go to your partner, you're like, hey, is it okay if we potentially have a marriage contract or a prenup? So what would your advice be in terms of like how to approach a partner and say like, listen, I love you, but I also want to protect myself if God forbid anything was to happen?
You're 100% right. I've been unsuccessful in convincing some of my closest friends to get marriage contracts done. But the way I explain it to my clients or my close friends is it's an insurance policy. So the hope is that you'll never have to use it. But in the event you do, it might actually make the separation a bit more amicable, less messy, and you might actually preserve that relationship or friendship or and it's a cost savings in the sense that you're not spending money on lawyers and litigation at the end.
And speaking of assets, you mentioned that there is different ways that are marriage versus a common law or cohabitating.
Common law.
Yeah, common law. Okay, so common laws, like what kind of rights do each of those two have, and like how do they differ?
Yeah. So if you're married, you automatically get to share in the other person's property. So any wealth that was accumulated from the date of
Good job, but I don't have anybody.
For any wealth, are you high-fiving because you're married?
Yeah.
Any wealth that was accumulated from the date of marriage until the date of separation, you get to share in that, right? And anything you brought into the marriage, you don't have to share. And the one exception though, so this is for married spouses, is the matrimonial home. So can I do a quick example?
Yeah,
We have to,
of course.
So for example, if I'm getting married and I own a property and we're going to live in that property, and I marry someone, theoretically the next day they get to, if we were to split up, they get to share 50% of that property. The other example is if I were to get married and I have an investment property and we're not living in that property, I only have to share the increase in value from the date of marriage to the date of separation. So if we were only together for a year, and it's only gone up, $50,000, then that's all I'm sharing, as opposed to the entire property. And I mean, there's exceptions for short-term marriages, and that I won't get into, but so that's kind of instant. Like those property rights are instant as soon as you're married. With common law, you don't have those property rights automatically, and there are some rare cases where you can apply to get those property rights, but they're very, it's an uphill battle and it's expensive, and, they're rarely awarded. So some examples where they might be, think of those situations where someone puts in a lot of money to a property and, it would be unfair for them not to benefit, or they've increased the value of the property, right? So spending, $100,000 on a renovation, like you should reap that benefit.
So between the two, let's say between the two spouses, one of them is the main breadwinner, the other one is not. If they were to get separated or divorced, would they be able to get spousal support, or how would that work in Ontario versus US? In US, they had all kinds of.
I can't really comment on. So I'm only licensed to practice in Ontario, but in terms of the property that we are talking about, whether you're working in the marriage or not, your property rights are the same.
Okay.
So the way courts see it is that people contribute in different ways to the relationship. So, someone might not be working outside the home, but they're caring for kids or doing household tasks that is considered, their contribution.
And so before we get to divorce, what are some, let's say, top 3 things that people should pay attention to before even thinking about marriage? Like I remember you saying finance is a big thing.
Yes, yeah. Do a background check. No.
I wish it was that easy.
So you don't marry any crazies.
I mean, sometimes you just don't know people.
I know.
I mean, you might not know them. But definitely finances, like you said.
Yeah. So in terms of finance, and I had mentioned a marriage contract or prenup. So speaking to a lawyer, I mean, I know it's a shameless plug, because not in every situation, you don't need a marriage contract in every situation, or a cohabitation agreement. The law may already protect you. So like I said, I mean, if you're, if you keep your, for example, a lot of people, and this is younger couples, they'll come to me because their parents are insisting that they have a marriage contract or a cohabitation agreement because they expect to, get an inheritance or large gifts from parents. But the law already protects inheritances. So what they need is education, because they need to know that in order to protect the inheritance, they need to keep that separate. So if they receive it, keep it in a separate account, they don't have to share that. But if they keep it and dump it to pay down the mortgage, or, buy a property and put both names, then they lose that. So, a lot of what I'm trying to do also is educating people so that they know their rights, because, you don't always, need a marriage contract or go through that exercise.
One question that kind of popped up in my mind was, let's say that the couple who's married are living in the same house, right? And one of them decides to file for divorce. How important is it for that person who filed or didn't file to not leave the house? Because I often hear this common myth, or if it's a fact, I don't know, that they need to stay in the house to have the house.
I hear this from 80% of my clients, and it drives me nuts. So you don't lose, in terms of property rights, you don't lose anything at all. So you can leave the house. I hear also, I don't know where this comes from, but that you could be, charged with abandoning the house, or, so I don't know where this comes from, but absolutely not. What I warn clients about is, if there are children, especially young children, not to leave without a parenting agreement in place. So they don't lose their right to be with their children, right? But if the children stay in the home with the other spouse, that spouse can withhold the children from them, right? You can't do anything if they're just refusing to provide you with parenting time. So it creates this sort of artificial status quo where the person or the spouse in the home is now the primary caregiver. So that's a concern. And the other concern is when you move out, the other spouse, the mortgage might be paid off, or you're paying the mortgage, and they're kind of just, cushy in the home, and there's no incentive for them to move forward. So that's the other hesitation. But again, you don't lose your right. It just mean that, they may be less inclined to sell it because right now they're comfortable, you're out, and they just want to continue that for as long as possible.
Wow. And so what is the difference between, I guess, a divorce and I guess there's also
Separation?
Separation.
Yeah.
So
a separation
before the divorce, or?
Yeah. So separation just means that you separated from a spouse, and that there's no, the legal definition is there's no reasonable prospect that you guys will reconcile. So you don't need a legal document to say that you're separated. There's a lot of case law because sometimes the date of separation matters for dividing financial means, but it could be, for some people, it's the last time they had sex, when they split up their finances, the date of the last argument, when someone moves out. So there's no clear circumstance when someone is separated. And divorce is just a piece of paper that says you're divorced. And in Ontario, you really only need that if you want to get remarried. And sometimes when I'm representing clients who have a property in other jurisdictions, sometimes they need that divorce to register the divorce in that country, so that they can sort out their finances and divide things. But aside from, at least in Ontario, aside from getting remarried, and obviously peace of mind, some people just don't want to, they don't want to be still technically married to someone, but.
Because it can also affect your taxes, right? If you're still married, or if you're
well, you people normally file as separated, so I don't think there's get tax advice disclaimer. So I don't think there's any implications on that front. Most people start filing separated.
So speaking of divorce itself, so if somebody wanted to get a divorce, not me. I'm just joking. But if somebody wanted to get a divorce, what would be the first step that they need to take, or what step would you recommend before even considering divorce?
Mediation.
Yes. I was not going to say that, but yes. So meeting with a professional that can kind of tell you your options. And yeah, I'm a huge proponent of mediation. I think it is the best way to resolve, all the issues stemming from your separation. And it's the least contentious. It's the cheapest route. It's the option that will preserve has the highest likelihood of preserving relationships, and that's really important when there are children, and you might have to co-parent with this person for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
So when I was looking at Stat Canada, one of the things that I found interesting was it said on average it takes about 5 months to go through filing to actually getting fully divorced. Is that true?
Yes.
Oh, really?
That's fairly accurate. It actually depends. In Ontario, it depends on which courthouse you're filing in. So, and I can talk, pre and post pandemic. I'd say, pre-pandemic in Toronto, probably looking at 2 to 3 months. During the pandemic, it took over a year to get that divorce paper. And now it's come back down where I'd say, looking at 4 or 5 months. In some other jurisdictions, like Newmarket, Brampton, like each pocket has their own courthouse, and times would vary.
Okay, interesting.
And what's the number one reason people get divorced? Or top 3?
Yeah,
from your experience.
I'd say like divorce versus just staying separated.
Yes, or either or.
Yeah, I'd say most people just want a clean slate, and they don't want to consider themselves associated with the other person.
But the main reason for their separation is it finance?
I'd say finance. Yeah.
All right. Well, another question I had was when I just got lost in your eyes, but this is a problem with video podcasting because let me rephrase that. I completely lost that train of thought. But okay, so I'm gonna pass the mic.
I'm just still curious. So finances is number one, and then the second one would just be like they just don't get along anymore. They lose love for each other, disagreements, arguments.
Yeah, it's tough because So my work as a lawyer, I only represent one party, and one thing, it's hard for me to comment on like, number one, number two, number three, because it's I don't keep those stats, and I'm just kind of trying to draw back on my memories anecdotally. But one thing that I notice is it's with anything. I mean, one person has obviously decided to end the relationship, and like there are very different stages in the process, right? Oftentimes when I'm meeting with a person that isn't initiating it, like they did not see it coming. They're shocked, and they're still trying to process that. So even trying to negotiate things is really tough, because one person is completely checked out and the other person just learned that there was a problem, which is a problem.
Yes, of course.
So, speaking of initiating a divorce versus the non-initiator versus the initiator, if only one person's caught off guard, for a divorce to be successful, is it necessary that both of them agree on the divorce?
No, for the divorce, no. So in Ontario, we have a no-fault divorce. So after 1 year of being separated, a court will grant you a divorce. There are things like, you need to show that if there are kids, that they're being cared for, and that if there's child support owing, that's being paid. So there's some, reasons why a divorce might be delayed. But you can't prevent your spouse from getting divorced.
All right.
Doesn't stop people from trying.
Yeah.
There's this notion, right? Like I think, from television, that someone has to sign divorce papers, right? And I think in a lot of movies we see, people being chased around. Like it has to be personally served on the other spouse, but they don't need to consent to it.
There must be a lot of emotions involved, especially for the person who's caught off guard.
Yes, yeah.
And it's like, how do you handle somebody like that? I mean, you just obviously you can't be emotionally tied to it, but I can't imagine.
Refer them to therapy.
Yeah, seriously, that's tough.
It is tough, and it takes time, right? It takes time for them to go through those same stages that probably took that other person, years to come to. And depending on how quickly things move, I mean, if an application has been started, then they really need to deal with it right away. If an application hasn't been started, then we might have some time, and things can kind of settle for a few months while we're gathering financial disclosure, and it doesn't need to happen instantly.
So one scenario that I wanted to share with you and get your insight on was, so I have a friend that has been trying to find someone to file divorce with, but the person has disappeared for 4 years. So in cases like that, how would like a friend of mine, or how would the woman or man get a divorce if they can't find a person to serve?
They have to be divorced. They have to be married forever.
Oh, really?
So there's ways. So you have to basically just convince the court that you've done everything possible to find them. And if you have, so normally you have to serve someone personally. So you hire a process server and have someone physically hand them the documents. If there's some other way to find them, and you can prove to the court that the documents were brought to their attention. So it might be I've served people through Facebook.
Oh, wow.
So, you have their
media,
active
make
Facebook
sure.
profile and
Don't accept Darlene Wrights.
So yeah, it's just a matter of satisfying the court. And I've had to hire process servers in other countries and, do that due diligence in those countries.
So you got to be a private investigator almost.
Yes, yeah.
Do you work with a lot of private investigators?
Yeah, not a lot, but a few of my files warrant that kind of work.
Okay, amazing. Now I would love for you to take off your family lawyer / mediator hat.
Is it too boring?
No. And I'm just curious. So earlier we were speaking about like someone being caught off guard, right? I'm just curious, is it most of the time, is there any gender specific, or is it just like, it's just random?
It's not.
Oh, yeah?
It's not at all, no. So I think I said earlier, I mean, maybe if I go back and count, I'll be completely off. But I think my clients are about 50%,
Okay.
male, female. But no, it can happen to anyone.
Do you see any differences between heterosexual couples versus same-sex couples in terms of divorce?
No, the dynamics, of
Still
the
apply.
relationship
Yeah.
are, I'd say, exactly the same.
Yeah.
I was saying earlier, I do a lot of work with individuals leaving abusive relationships, and I mean those issues are pervasive in that population as well, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, I have, I represent more heterosexual couples just in terms of numbers. So I mean, my sample size might be small.
Yeah.
In general, it's just a sample size of one lawyer. But
No, but I also think there's less same-sex marriage than heterosexual marriages, so that could also affect your numbers there.
right, yeah,
Possibly.
Yeah.
It's changing now.
Yeah.
yeah.
I know Celia wants to get married, right?
I do.
Yeah. So do you have any advice? I remember earlier you mentioned that, but for someone like Celia,
So let's say for myself,
Yes.
young professional entrepreneur, potentially, I would like to get married. What are some things? You said first marriage contract, talking about finances, obviously before, which is pretty huge. Any other pieces of advice?
I think talking about talking about finances. I mean, you told me to take off my lawyer hat, so I'll share I'll share a personal story. I remember when I got married, we didn't get married through the Catholic Church, but I remember there was this program in the Catholic Church where it was basically like a couples like get to know each other, and so I felt a bit slighted that I wasn't doing the program, so I enrolled in the program. I was like, not getting married in the Catholic Church, but I still want the program. And they had different topics every week, and one of them was finances, and there were people in the room that had never once discussed anything relating to finances and some other hot topics. So it was just shocking. And I see that as well. Like when I sometimes mediate marriage contracts, which means that like I'll meet with both spouses and we'll negotiate the terms of a marriage contract. So I'm having really tough discussions with them. So I'm asking them, if they plan to have kids. I'm asking them, like if someone's going to be staying home with kids or what their intentions are with so. And if they haven't talked about that, I mean, it gets, quite awkward quite quickly, right? And I'm sure it leads to some interesting conversations at home, but I think just it's important. And some people might not do that on their own, and they need kind of that external
push.
So you recommend that Celia take her spouse and go to the church. Go to the church.
I mean, like, Darlene, can you meet us?
Can you put in a good word? Can you put in a good word with the church?
Like, Darlene, can you meet us for coffee?
Yes.
No, but I'm pretty good at having those conversations. I know a lot of people veer away from that, but those are important things to know, right? Especially if you have your own businesses.
Yes.
And potentially want to have kids.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So why is it that you want to get married?
So this is a really great conversation or piece for me, because me and my sister both grew up in the same household. My parents have been married for about 37 years. And so when I have seen the relationship go through ups and downs, they've been through a lot together, and they're still together till this day. Sometimes my mom wants to kill my dad, but that's natural, right? But for me, it's like the ultimate level of what I think the relationship could go to, but only the beginning piece of what the next phase could be like for the person I'm with.
Okay.
And so for me, it holds a lot of value for me in terms of why I want to get married.
Yeah.
I know it's not the end all be all. I know
Yeah.
it's the stepping stone, but I've always pushed myself to grow. And for me, growing also means growing with my partner. Whereas my sister, completely opposite, does not want to get married, totally terrified of that, even though she's been with her boyfriend now for 12 years, which is probably going to kill me.
Yeah, let's gossip about your
12
sister.
years.
Does he not know that marriage is not in the cards?
I mean, they both talked about it, but it's really interesting that we both grew up in the same household. We both saw my parents kind of go through, their ups and downs as a couple and being married. And for me, I still hold that value very strong. And for my sister, not that way. So, but
Okay,
yeah.
so since you asked that question to Sally, I'd like to ask you, since you are married. So as a
Is that
family
a good answer
lawyer,
though?
Yes,
Oh,
it is.
good
No, it's
answer,
good.
yeah. As a family lawyer, why did you decide to get married? Or because you had a contract drafted?
I got married before I got into family law. I remember I got married in the summer, and I in June, I think June, and I started practicing family law in September. So I didn't know better, but. We joke. I actually joked with my husband recently. I was like, practicing, because everyone always asks, like, does family law make you jaded, or how can you be married? And I was joking with my husband and telling him that it actually lowers the bar, because I come home and I was like, well, at least you're not crazy.
That's true. I guess you get to see people at their most heightened emotion when they're coming to you.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
It's a common saying among lawyers or judges is criminal lawyers see their clients at their best, and family lawyers see their clients at their worst, right? Because in criminal law, they're always dressed really nicely, and they show up and they're trying to show that they've changed, or with all the raw emotions, people are at their worst, and it's tough.
How long have you been married for?
12 years.
Amazing.
12 years. So this is another stat that just popped in my head. When I was looking at that stat for divorce, it said 15 years is an average of the people who got divorced. 15 years was the the duration of the marriage as an average.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a long time to be married. Yeah. But hey,
Years is a pretty long time.
It is a long time. I mean, I wonder how that's changed over time, because certainly seeing a lot of shorter marriages, right? Like my older clients, still seeing the very traditional relationships, 20 plus year marriages, and traditional gender roles. But now, more and more seeing, marriages 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and ending with, younger professional, be it heterosexual, same sex.
It's really interesting because, like, our parents grew up back then, and I just feel like I've just seen them go through so much stuff, and I feel like now it's not the same. Like, people are just more easy to kind of opt out when things get tough. I don't know if you agree with that, but it's just even just hearing my friends ending relationships because people weren't on the same page about something, and I'm just like, but with relationships is growth in time, right? It takes, so it's really interesting kind of to see now where people are at in terms, I think
Salia loves deeply. That's why
I do.
she's like, okay.
I think it's also about, societal expectations, right? And what was okay back then and not. And, even like the issue of domestic violence and it being acceptable to leave because of those reasons, and women feeling empowered to leave and having the resources that they need to leave, right? So many I've met with women for consultations who aren't yet separated, but just meeting with me to know, like, what will their life look like if they decide to separate. And a lot of women are staying in abusive relationships because financially they feel like they can't leave, right? They have, they can't pay rent. They have nowhere to go, and their options are to stay or go to a shelter. And it's a tough decision, right?
Yeah, no, my mom actually went to a shelter downtown when she got separated from my dad. But it was quite interesting because I think in Canada, if you there is they did give her allowance and bus tickets. That's what but I guess not for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been to a shelter. I don't know what it's like. I'm sure it's not like living at home, right? But I've worked with women who have gone to shelters, and it seems like a transformative experience because it's not just a place to live, right? They are helping you in every aspect of your life, right? So I work with social workers. I represented this young woman. She was I think she was under 20, and she was in a shelter, and she had a really young child, and they set her up with training. They applied to get her subsidized housing. found her job and like put all the steps in place where she could be financially independent with her son. Found, a lot of times with shelters, you'll actually, get bumped up the list for supportive housing and also daycare spots, subsidized daycare spots. So that's key. I mean, if you have like a 3-year-old and no daycare, it doesn't really matter what you're qualified to do.
So with all that in mind, you think it's not so much the people, but because there's more resources that people are getting more like divorces now than before, to backing, kind of like taking it back to anchoring it back to the question that you had earlier.
But I guess she's talking about domestic violence.
That it's just because it's people are talking about it more now, and it's I don't know what I would say to your question. I mean, the other thing too is, I mean, traditionally there were 1-income households, and now it's much more common to have 2-income households. So if you're leaving a relationship, you don't necessarily have to kind of start from scratch, right? And you already have a steady source of income. So, but again, it's living in one household, like, and then 2, there's always a shortfall, right? You're trying to live 2 separate households now. So there's going to be a shortfall and people have to downsize. So it's always a financial struggle.
So to kind of wrap things up, I think we're kind of getting to that point. So I'd love to ask you, would you recommend marriage to couples that are thinking about it?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, personally, I'm happy in my marriage, and like Sally was saying, I mean, it's a commitment to work through, tough times and be united in those, life struggles. So I guess from a personal standpoint, I'd say yes. From a legal standpoint, I mean, I can't really comment. I guess it depends.
Got it.
It's just pretty much do your research before you marry the person and ask the hard questions.
Yeah, and talk to Darlene Wrights, family lawyer and mediator.
Yeah. I think I want to ask a question about the domestic
sure.
violence piece that we could add in. I think would be good. If somebody is going through a process where they're married, experiencing domestic violence, what would be the first step that you recommend? Is that going to see a mediator, a family lawyer, or what resources do they have? And is there a website they can go to? Specific phone numbers that they can tap into?
Yeah. So, going to speak to a lawyer to know your rights is key. A lawyer who works in this field. So I do a lot of safety planning with domestic violence victims. So that's key. One organization in Toronto that is really great is the Barbara Schleifer Clinic. So they'll, consult and refer you to, whoever it is that you might need. So, and there are tons that I'm happy to share if you want to share on your social media afterwards.
I think that's just good to know.
100%. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode at the Better Woman Project podcast. My name is Naima, and
my name is Celia Lopez.
And we'd like to thank Darlene Wrights, our family lawyer and mediator in-house, discussing all things realities of breakdown of marriage, relationship, and how to better prepare before you get into a commitment that big. So thank you, Darlene.
All right. Thank you for having me.
And where can people find you?
Easiest place is probably on Instagram at Ontario Family Law. Or if you Google me, you'll find my website.
Google me. In other words, she's like, Google me. All right, thank you, and we will be back next week for another episode.
Thank you.